Hi, welcome to Shmirchik Culture's Corner, where you'll experience all the unpleasantness that comes with me. So, we're going to be reading about the pogrom on the Jews that happened in Ukraine in 1919, right? And it was government-sanctioned attacks on Jews, government-organized Ukrainian attacks on the Jewish people, and they were accused of being supporters of Bolshevikis and disloyal to the state of Ukraine, right? And so therefore they went on to massacre about 50 people, 50 individuals who were murdered in Kiev in 1919 for supposedly siding with the Bolsheviks, because the Jews were Bolsheviks in their eyes, and even though the Jews didn't have any connection, they were just minding their own business. So the Kiev pogroms of 1919 refers to a series of anti-Jewish pogroms in various places around Kiev, carried out by white volunteer army troops, which were part of the government, right? The series of events concerned the following districts: Skvera, June 23rd, 1919. It all happened on different days in 1919, right? A pogrom in which 45 Jews were massacred. Many were severely wounded, and 35 Jewish women were raped by army insurgents. Justengrad in August 1919, where a pogrom made its way through the shtetl, with an unspecified number of Jewish men murdered and Jewish women raped. Ivankiv district, 18 to 20 of October in 1919, in the pogrom carried out by Cossack and volunteer army troops. 14 Jews were massacred, 9 wounded, and 15 Jewish women and girls were raped by units under the command of Struk in 3 days of carnage. This is what we call the Kiev pogroms of 1919. So I did a series, and if you watch my videos in sequence, then you will know where we are up to when I read the book of the pogrom of 1919. Right? So now, right, there was rape involved and all that. So here, if you look in my channel, you will see that I did a series. So if you want to know where we're up to, you just need to go and watch part 1, part 2. I don't know if you can see this. I need to make myself small because apparently part 1, part 2 of my channel, the slaughter of the Jews in Ukraine, and where's the part 3 is right here. And we're up to page 56 of the carnage, right? That's where we're up to of the book, right? It's a long, long book. So we're going to try to get through it. A lot of the time I would read books just to be able to gain knowledge for myself and hope that I will get it stored in my brain somehow, and it will increase my knowledge, because that's the main thing in this world, I think, is learning, right? It's important. We're in this world for a reason. It's to learn lessons. It's to learn new things every day, and it's to be of service to your family, your friends, and try to help each other. That's what I think. So we're up to chapter 3, the Batko. But before we do that, I will light the menorah, the Hanukkah menorah, because it is the 4th night of Hanukkah. No, not the 4th night. It's the 8th night of Hanukkah. Basically, there's 8 nights where we celebrate. 8 days and nights we celebrate Hanukkah, and basically we celebrate it. And you know, it's great because you have 8 days to celebrate, to play dreidel, to eat latkes, to eat oily donuts, and any excuse to eat more and more sugary, oily donuts for 8 days. And it's the last night, so let's try to do that, and then we'll go on to discuss this pogrom of 1919 of the Jews, right? That happened to the Jews by the Ukrainian people on their Jewish neighbors. So, without further ado, let's try to do this. Okay, here's my menorah. It's a little bit squiggly, so what we're going to do is, hold on. What we're going to do is, I have a candle here. Oops. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to try to make sure that the candles don't fall out. So I'm gonna put fire under the thing, and then I'm gonna stick it in, right, and hope it stays. It's not enough, right? So you stick it in like that, and then you hope it stays, you know? But it looks like it's not enough. I have to make sure. Okay, I think it's sticking now. I'm just gonna make sure it sticks. It has to stick in, because if it's wobbling, it's not good to have a wobbly candlesticks, right? And we will light the menorah, we'll sing a few songs, and then we will basically talk about the pogrom that the Ukrainians did to the Jews. And if you want to know what's happening in the book, you just need to watch the previous videos. I probably need to make a playlist, right? Hold on. I need to make a playlist of the videos, because my book, we read a lot of this channel, even though it's not my book channel, right? It's like my Kvetcher's channel. We read a lot of books. My other channel as well. My other channel is TIPSY Tarot, but it's not for book reading. I have another book reading channel, so we try out different books over there. Books that I can usually find online, right? So it's a little bit hard to find books that you want in Israel, because everything's in Hebrew, right? The books are all in the bookstore is all in Hebrew. All the books are Israeli, and they have a few. They actually have a few. They have a few. What do you call that? They have a few English books, but it's not the same, right? So now I'm gonna light the shamish, which is this, and then we will say the blessing, and we will light the menorah, right? Okay, so here goes. I'm gonna stand for this. Let me say the blessing, because the miracle of Hanukkah, right? Do I light from right to left or left to right? One second. It has to be done in a certain way, right? So, one second, I have to find out. How do we light the candles in the chat AI? Which side of the Hanukkah candles do we light first? See if you can handle it. When lighting the menorah, you start by lighting the newest candle first, which is the candle on the rightmost side. Okay, on the right. I don't know if I can really trust the AI, because today they told me it's the 4th night when it's really the 8th night, but whatever. Okay, start from here, this side, going down that side, right? So, okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Chanukah. All of you say Amen. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa nisim l'avoseinu vayamim mahir b'azman hazeh. Amen. So it's basically talking about the miracles that have happened here a long time ago. Then we'll sing the song. Ma'asor Yeshuati Lechana Elisabea Tikon Vestefilati Vishantota Visamea. I don't know the words. Matbeya Nini Lelabea we sing Hane I ziri-da, 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 ziri-da. Ya da da da, ziri-da, 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 ziri-da. Honey rice, hallelujah. Honey rice, hallelujah. Honey rice, hallelujah, hallelujah. Honey rice, hallelujah. Anu madlikin, hot choice. Bum, 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 ba-dum, bum, 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 ba-dum. Honey rice, hallelujah. Bum, 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 ba-dum. Anu malikin, Allah choice, Allah nisi, Allah. I'll hold my baby. Allah niflois, she'asi salavaseinu, she'asi salavaseinu, layamim hahem bizman hazeh, layamim hahem bizman hazeh, bizman hazeh. Al-yedei kayanecha hakdashim, 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 al-yedei kayanecha hakdashim. Pararam, 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 pararam. Chol Shemayim Simei Chanukah Ner Salalu Kaidashim, Chol Shemayim Simei Chanukah Ner Salalu Kaidashim. Ve'ein lanu rishus leishtamesh bahen ela lirasan bilvad bilvad. Chol Shemayim Simei Chanukah Ner Salalu Kaidashim, Chol Shemayim Simei Chanukah Ner Salalu Kaidashim. Ve'ein lanu rishus leishtamesh bahen ela lirasan bilvad bilvad. Good day, raspberry. Le, hi daisu hala, hi daisu hala, shika agada. Hi daisu hala, shika agada. Only safa, only safa, yeah, sure safa. Only safa, sure safa. Okay, so now we lit the candles for Hanukkah, and basically, because we lit the candles for Hanukkah, it's the 8th night of Hanukkah, right? We can sing some songs, shall we? Should we try to sing some songs? Should we sing? Let's try to get, let's sing Ma'os Store for fun. Okay. Ma'os Store Yeshivasi. Okay. Ma'os Store Yeshuvasi Lechana Elishabeach Tikon Beit Tefilati L'sham Toda Nizabeach Le'ek Tachin Mabeach Mitzor Haman Nabeach Azegmor V'shir Mizmor Hanukkah Tamizbeach Azegmor V'shir Mizmor And that's all for what we're gonna do for the for the Shmirchik Okay, very nice. Okay, that's my attempt at the Hanukkah menorah. Now on to business. Okay, so the custom is that, where I come from at least, is that we're supposed to watch the flames for a half hour. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to put it in front of myself near the window, and I'll watch it from there. Right? And then we put away the prayer book. Check some. Okay. That's right. Okay. That away. Down to business. Okay. Back to business. Business! Okay. Now we're going to go and read the book. So we spoke about what happened on the 1919 slaughter. So we're going to continue. We're up to chapter 3, the Batko, right? We ended off where the Ukrainians, after they slaughtered the Jews of Ukraine, there was a socialist party that was gaining power in Ukraine. I'm not sure how that worked, but the Ukrainians tried to deny the crimes that they did to the Jewish community in order to get support from this other Jewish community, the other Jewish people that had a party that had lots of influence, right? So when the Directory rehabilitated itself in the eyes of Western European public opinion and had to seek support from the Jewish socialistic parties of the right, it was only then that the Rada of the People's Ministers spoke a decisive word, and the chief Ataman issued his order of the day to the troops on the 26th of August 1919. So, Chapter 3, the Batko. With the occupation of Kiev by the Soviet power, the so-called Internal Front was first formed, the rising of the Ukrainian peasants against the Soviet government. The latter extended its power over the large cities, Kiev, Yekaterinslav, Kharkov, Odessa, Chernigov, and others. My father's from Kharkov. And the territory covered by the railroads, the localities a few versts away from the railroads, were already in revolt. The suppression of these uprisings, which always assumed more intense forms, was the essential characteristic of the Soviet period in the Ukraine. While the history of the peasants' uprisings represented at the same time the history of the Jewish massacres in the Ukraine, the peasants in the Ukraine were armed to the teeth. Even during the German occupation, the villages were always provided with arms. Not only revolvers and guns, but also machine guns and small cannons. The Soviet power, which always fought against the troops of the Directory, was not able to penetrate into the villages and disarm them. Besides, the army of the Soviet power was unable to exercise sufficient influence and not sufficiently disciplined. Politically, too, the Soviet power was unable to exercise sufficient influence upon the middle peasants. The difference between city and country in the Ukraine was too great. The Ukrainian village is very rich, and the peasants refused to give up their products and their grain to the indigent city for the Ukrainsky money, or the Ukrainian karbovansky, which they possessed in plenty. There was scarcely a house which did not own bales of worthless paper money, for the peasant could not obtain what he needed for this money. He could get neither agricultural machines, nor manufactured goods, nor salt. The blockade made it impossible for the city to play the role of the middleman, or to obtain its necessities. The Soviet power was therefore compelled to take the grain from the peasants by force of arms. To be sure, the Soviet government had made a decree regulating the exchange of agricultural products for salt and manufactured goods, a standard of exchange, and, in fact, had been established 1 pound of salt to equal 1 pound of flour. This was changed later, and 1 pound of salt was made equal to 2 poods. 1 pood equals 40 pounds of flour. In reality, however, there was no possibility of transporting manufacturers or salt and bringing them to their destinations. After the internal front made railroad communication in the Ukraine almost impossible by reason of the continual blowing up and damaging of rolling stocks and tracks, but the peasants were not willing to give anything away for products prospective in principle, for they mistrusted the commune. Not only the rich peasants, but the middle peasants too regarded the commune as a hydra which strove to take everything out of the village without giving them anything in return. The rich Ukrainian village was anarchistic in temper. It recognized every government so long as it left the village undisturbed and demanded no taxes, agricultural products, recruits, and so on. But the money any government attempted to make demands for the flat land or to press claims, the village revolted, took out the buried weapons and used them, and finally brought about the fall of the government in question. The Ukrainian village was the Sphinx, whose riddle could not be solved, and which destroyed every power that rose before it. This is the explanation of the cinematographic rapidity with which the various governments followed each other in the Ukraine. A special peasant phraseology was formed. "We are Bolshevists," said the peasants in the Ukraine, "but not communists. The Bolsheviki gave us land, while the communists take away our grain without giving us anything for it. We will not allow the Red Army to hang the commune about our necks. Down with the commune! Long live the Bolsheviki!" The attitude of the Ukrainian peasants towards the commune is shown in the following incident, which would be humorous if it were not that it really took place under the tragic circumstances of the pogrom temper. So it was all happening about the same time, right? So the pogroms, the attacks on the Jews, were happening at the same time that the peasants were revolting against the communists, right? And this is interesting because, like my father says, this is my father's humor, he says, it would be very funny if it weren't so tragic, right? And I guess this is where he gets his humor from, the Russian dark humor. It says here, it would be humorous if it were not that it really took place under tragic circumstances of the pogrom temper. The authorized agent of the relief committee of the Red Cross had been commissioned to establish a kitchen in Iskorost for those who had suffered from the pogrom. Right, so this is talking about the aftermath of the pogrom and what's going on at this time in Ukraine, right? So most people that are just coming in on this, they won't really understand what's happening unless they watch my previous videos, because we are reading this book. It's in sequence, right? Turn that off. Rumors of the creation of a common kettle, that terrible common kettle with which the agitators frightened the peasants, were circulated also in the neighboring district of Oshomir. The inhabitants of Oshomir said that the Jews had already established the commune, and affirmed that they had seen the kettle with their own eyes. I don't know what the kettle is. The peasants of Ushimir threatened the Jewish population with the words, "Why don't you go to the Iskorost? There the kettle is ready made. is already made, fearing an accusation of having established the commune, right? So the Jews at the time, when all this unrest was going on, when the Bolshevik Revolution was happening, when the Communist Party established themselves, and the Jews that were living in Ukraine, right, and the Ukrainians were fighting against the communists, right? The Jews were left to be the scapegoats. They were always blamed for everything, and it seems here the Jews were afraid to be accused of being the ones to have created the commune. And the Jews in Ukraine, they paid for it with their lives. They paid for being Jewish and being accused of things they didn't do with their lives, right? So the Jews of Ushomer asked the agent of the Red Cross not to establish a kitchen after the model of the one in Iskorost, so that they might not be exposed to the danger of being regarded as communists. So I guess there was a kitchen that was being established and made for starving Jews at the time in Ukraine, and they didn't want it to look at anything like the model of the communes, right, which they called the Iskorost, so that they might not be exposed to the danger of being regarded as communists. The attitude of opposition towards the city power led to a rejection of state power in general. The anarchistic village needs no government. Of what good is it? The village has its leaders, viz. Its elders, Batki. The government is never constant. It always changes. Since the March Revolution, the Ukraine has had too many governments to be able to believe in the durability of any kind of state order. The provisional government, the Central Rada, and its secretariat, the first period of the Soviet power, the German occupation, the rule of the Germans, the directory, the Soviet power again, and the armies pressing it from two sides, the army of Petlura and that of the volunteers, their Ataman leader, however, their Batko, they always have. However, their Batko, they always have. He is one of them, and they believe in the firmness and unshakenness of the armed regime of the peasants with the Batko at their head. So the Batko is their leader. It's the leading position of the Ukraine, right? The Ukrainian peasants. They don't want anybody else to take over the village, and it seems like there are lots of different foreign entities that are always trying to occupy Ukraine, right? So they fought off different people who are trying to occupy them, different countries, right? Let's check the noise. I see. Let's check that it's working. Different foreign entities. Okay, continuing on. The village rejects every thought of the possibility of an attack on the peasants and their eternal rights to the land and its products by the landed proprietors of the White Guard. But insofar as the village sees a danger on the right, insofar as danger threatens the interests of the village and the right of the peasants to the land, they will support the left in including the Soviet power, which favors them in this matter. A characteristic episode will make clear the attitude of the village to the Soviet power when there is a danger threatening from the right. In the last months of the Soviet government in the Ukraine, July 1919, there were frequent uprisings among those Soviet troops, which consisted of peasant freebooters, such a regiment stationed near Kiev resolved to march to Kiev to slit the bellies of the Jewish commissars, to set aside the commune and reestablish the true Bolshevist order. So before the Jews can't win. If you watched my videos in sequence, as I said, because we were reading a book, it speaks about how the Jews were getting accused of being communists, Bolshevists, right? Now the Jews are being accused of being now it looks like a lot of the Ukrainians were taking on the Bolshevik identity, right? They were embracing the Bolshevist identity and communism, and which they once rejected because it was a so-called a Jewish thing, which makes no sense. Like, the whole thing is warped, but it doesn't matter, right? As long as you can blame the Jews for every wrong that goes on in your life and to attack the Jews, it's as if their problems get resolved somehow, right? Of course, we know it doesn't get resolved because it just makes matters worse for them, but it just somehow unites them. They allowed a representative of the Soviet power to have its say, and after hearing him, they deliberated and persisted in their former resolution. In full fighting form, the regiment marched to Kiev. The political commissar, who was in this case the principal agitator, resolved to hold another meeting in order to heighten the temper of the regiment. For there were a few who hesitated under the impression of the speech of the Soviet representative. The political commissar made a long speech, pointed to the harm that would come from the Commune, and said that the war must be ended altogether. Let us remove the Commune, make peace with Denikin, and go home. These words acted like an electric spark. He invites us to make peace with the landed proprietors. He is a traitor. The unfortunate speaker was put in chains. So the person who wanted to make peace was put in chains and handed over to the representatives of the Soviet government, and the regiment was ordered to the Denikin front to fight, I guess. The Batko, who are the Ukrainian peasants, right, flesh of the flesh and blood of the village, stands close to the village in his temper, thought, life, and character. The Batko is not always an ordinary peasant, as we shall see later. The most important Batki are highly developed persons with European education, but they can put themselves in the position of the village, think its thoughts and ideals, make its desires and moods their own, and embody the will of the Ukrainian peasant. They are able to lead the peasant masses, who yield them respect and obedience so long as they give expression to the will of the village. The Batko understands how to take the peasant and knows how to win him over by social or national motives. The Batko is perfectly familiar with the revolutionary phraseology and adapts it successfully to the level of the peasant. He is primarily a demagogue. In his speech and proclamations, the Batko expresses himself in favor of the Soviet power without the communists. He demands, besides, that the Rada be controlled by the village. He is against the bourgeoisie and against the communists, but for the Bolsheviki. Often he expresses himself in the effect that the communists treat the bourgeoisie too gently. It's the fancy people, the rich people, the bourgeoisie, I think. The Batko is opposed to a centralized government and its apparatus. He demands a free association of anarchistic peasant communities, with the Batki at the head. Socially, the program of the Batki is primitively anarchistic. Rob, requisition, take possession of the cities. Take Yekaterinslav, take Kiev, take Kharkov. The cities belong to you. Take away the property of the wealthy classes. Hand in hand with the anarchistic phrase and the attacks against the Kiev Soviet government, the anti-Semitic pogrom agitation moved through the land. The Soviet power was, according to their idea, a foreign government of Muscovitish Jewish origin, which the village did not understand. The peasant knew only that they wanted to take everything out of the village and give him, in return, colored little papers, which were found in the village in plenty. He knew it was a government. So they didn't understand money, right? He knew it was a government which proceeded against the village with armed force. Because they're peasants, they don't know better. In very many cases, Jews were the agents of the Soviet government in the villages and districts. They often neglected the interests of the local population and had no regard for them. The mistakes, abuses, and offenses of the local agents of the Soviet power were noted and utilized in a definite way by the anti-Soviet powers, who represented them as characteristic qualities of the Jewish nation. So these are all lies that they are concocting in order to unite themselves against whichever side that they see more threatening. And so somehow blaming the Jews is going to solve their problems, but it doesn't, right? So the Soviet powers were represented as characteristic qualities of the Jewish nation, which ruled over the Orthodox peasant. The poison of the anti-Semitic agitation flowed in a wide stream over the whole of the Ukraine. The Batki understood clearly the value of the Jewish pogrom as a political weapon, right? So they wanted the Jews to pay for their alleged crimes, which of course we know they were innocent of, and you give them blood, which the villagers wanted, the peasants wanted, and then you could get them on your side somehow, politically. The Batki understood clearly the value of the Jewish pogrom as a political weapon established by the Directory. They saw the real results of Jew baiting in the unruliness of the mob, which was so necessary for them. So in order to control the mob, because they're crazy, unruly, lawless, and savage, right? They can't control them, so they try to direct all of that unruliness and all that wildness against the Jew. Let it all out on the Jew, and then they can somehow tame the wild beasts of the peasants, who they were, right? Giving up the Jewish population to the village as booty seemed to the Batkis advantageous in many respects. In the first place, those Jews in the cities and districts who had become rich during the German rule possessed objects which the Ukrainian peasant needed urgently, as for example, household articles, and what was most important, clothing, linen, and shoes, of which nothing could any longer be found in the village. Even a pair of old shoes of a poor Jew excited the attention of the village population, rich in grain and Kerensky money and poor in everything else. During the pogroms, the Jewish population, those who were murdered as well as those who survived, were stripped of everything to the last shirt. The Batki and the neighboring villages successfully vied with each other in popularity by declaring the Jewish possessions as the property of the peasants and by distributing the plundered Jewish goods free of cost to the most needy, or by instituting cheap sales. This method of satisfying the needs of the village received wide imitation. In the second place, national baiting was a means of uniting to a certain extent the heterogeneous peasantry. This was especially important at those moments when the middle peasants vacillated between the right and the left under the pressure of the danger threatening from the right. When the political program of the Batki at this or that moment did not correspond to the temper of the peasants, national baiting had to fill the lacuna in its reciprocal relations. In the third place, the identification of Jews and communists, which, however, did not hinder them from at the same time declaring the Jews to be bourgeoisie, and thus summoning the population to murder and pillage, because the Jews are fancy and they have money, so you gotta kill them, right? Made it possible for them to carry on the fight against their dangerous enemies, the Soviet power. Down with the communists, down with the Jewish commissars. This was the motto of the Stadtgrin, a member of the left wing of the Ukrainian Soviet revolutionists, who carried on simultaneously an anti-Soviet and a pogrom-file agitation in Uman. At the hearing before the Extraordinary Commission, he was charged with anti-Semitic propaganda. Asked if he did not know that he might have caused a Jewish pogrom, he replied, at the hearing before the Extraordinary Commission, he was charged with anti-Semitic propaganda and asked if he did not know that he might have caused a Jewish pogrom. He replied that he had in fact incited the peasants to make pogroms, for otherwise it was impossible to get the peasants to rise. Order number 1 for the city. Order number I for the city of Uman, which was issued after the pogrom, and signed by Klemenko, the chief commander of the rebellious troops, say among other things, the rule of the Jews has fallen, and the insurgents are instructed to pay no heed to the Jewish agents and the police spies. Kumulman reports from the district of Mutosovo, government of Kiev, as follows. The peasants distrusted the Soviet power. They did not take them seriously and regarded them as a foreign power almost as much as the rule of the Germans. This distrust of the new government was artificially kept awake by the local intelligentsia. From the first day, they took an attitude of opposition to the new government. The local Ukrainian intelligentsia, like the postmaster, the seminary students, and the teachers, openly agitated against the Soviet power. They played the national question as the main trump. The government of Petlura, the postmaster Kulik, impresses upon the peasants, is our real native Ukrainian government, but the government of the Bolsheviki is a Jew government. So, is our real native Ukrainian government, but the government of the Bolsheviki is a Jew government. I was in Cherkasy, the teacher, Palega assured the peasants, in the commissariat for the enlightenment of the people, and what have I seen there? Nothing but Jews. The whole commissariat filled with Jews. So basically scaring and inciting violence towards the local Jews in their villages. To go and, regardless of whether the Jews are innocent or not of anything they're being accused of, just go and kill them, murder them. It seems like that's a very common thing. A common theme we see with a lot of the world, right? They have no problem being vicious, violent, and killing and murdering and pillaging and raping and coveting and stealing. There's nothing stopping them from this type of behavior. The social position of the Batko is various. There are various grades, from the Batko who controls a village, a district, and sometimes several districts, up to the Batko who rules over entire governments, provinces, and plays a great political role. Like Grigoriev and Makhno, the last names are leaders of the Ukrainian peasants, able men with clear political purpose. Batki like Zeleny, Struk, Angel, Yatsenko, Tiotionik, Klimenko. Popov are peasants who have no independent policy, but are instruments of the leaders who know how to comprehend and formulate the dissatisfaction of the middle peasants. Every Batko has his sphere of activity. Struk worked north of Kiev, in the district of Chernobyl. Sokolovsky carried on his activities west of Kiev, in the district of Radomyśl, and in the neighboring parts of the circuit of Zhytomyr, south of Kiev, in the district of Tripoli, on the Dnieper. Zeleny had his field of activity. In the precincts of Tarasha was Yatsenko, Gulob, and others. In the district of Brusilov, we find the group of Mordelev. In Lipovets, the association of Sokolovsky. In the district of Uman, the bands of Klimenko, Tiotionik, and Popov. In the district of Gaisin, Volyinets, and in the region of Bakhmach, Engel, almost all these small Batki are former followers of Petlura, whom the director gave object lessons in political fighting, which they have put to good use and work always within the limits of their homes. Struk is a 23-year-old peasant from the village of Griny, near Gorno Stipol. Sokolovsky comes from the village of Gorbelevo, 19 versts from Radomyśl, and is the son of a deacon of the village. Zeleny lives in Tripoli, is the son of a local cabinet maker, and attained the rank of corporal in the war. Mordelev comes from the village Zabilachi, not far from Brusilov. Sokolovsky was formerly a lower official of the Algarian administration of Lipovets. Volyinets was born in the village Karlovka, near Gaisin. He is a peasant of 23, former clerk of the forestry administration. Yatsenko was born in the village Krushan, 3 versts from Tarasha. He is about 24 years old, attended a school of 2 classes in Tarasha, became a follower of Petlura in March, and initiated his activity with Jew baiting. The Jews are all communists. They defile our churches and change them into stables. The leading Batki often go over from one government to the other. This is true of Grigoriev, for example, who watered a great part of the Ukraine with Jewish blood. Under the hetman, he held a responsible position in the economic department of the administration and came in close contact with the village. He is a native Ukrainian from the city of Alexandria in the government of Kherson. Going from village to village, he organized groups of insurrectionists, at the head of which he raised the banner of Petlura, the ambition to make a career, the desire to be more conspicuous, the comprehension of the tendencies of the peasants at the time, who were attempting a reaction against German rule and wishing for a radical power of the extreme left, induced him to put himself on the side of the Soviet government. Grigoriev placed himself at the head of strong associations of freebooters, and in a whirlwind campaign conquered the whole south, including Odessa. But he was not satisfied with being a leader of a Soviet army. He was casting eyes on the position of an independent ruler of South Russia, and dreamed of a dictatorship of his own. He systematically encouraged unbridled conduct among his troops, did everything to please their instincts and desires, and gave them to understand that they could do anything they liked as long as they were masters of Odessa. It is significant that as long as he had not broken with the Soviet government and had not refused to obey the military commands given to him to go to the Romanian front, Grigoriev abstained from all national baiting. In Odessa, his bands robbed the population under the pretext of fighting the bourgeoisie. but there were no serious excesses or pogroms. After the Soviet government declared Grigoriev an outlaw, he adopted a means that had been long proved in Ukraine to weld together his united bands. He identified the Soviet government with Judaism and preached its destruction. Right? If you ever want to win a war, it seems, to the non-Jews, you just have to unite your people against the Jews. So if you just accuse everybody of being Jewish, right? To be Jewish is like the worst thing. So, because they're anti-Semitic, right? And Jews are like the evil people and the thieves and the worst of humanity. So, okay, never mind that the communists, were basically the king of the communists was Lenin. But, that doesn't matter, right? Then came Stalin. They're not Jewish. Oh, but they're Jewish, right? So accuse them of being Jewish, and then you can unite your bands of monsters together to fight your so-called enemies. Grigoriev issued his manifesto of sad memory, universal, addressed to all the people, which has a very unfortunate significance for the Ukrainians, to the Ukrainian Jews. This manifesto, written in revolutionary phraseology, demands at the end the removal of the Soviet government, formed of foreign elements from the ever-hungry land of Moscow and the land where Christ was nailed to the cross, and the murder of the Jews. The watchword of Grigoriev found an echo in the Ukrainian village. It was taken up in the several localities by the local Batki, as well as by the bands of the Black Hundred in the Ukrainian cities and villages, and especially by the ultra-reactionary anti-Semitic intellectuals who are found in plenty in the cities and small towns, and was carried farther. This is extremely characteristic of the period of Grigoriev, which may be regarded in this respect as the forerunner of Denikin. Thus, in the country town of Goroshdych, in the government of Kiev, a former officer, Gritsai, stood at the head of the Grigoriev men. The pogrom was led by a small group of residents, teachers, and students of the local gymnasium and agricultural school. They were not only the instigators and leaders of the pogrom, but also soon took active part in pillage and murder. In the town of Zlatopol, government of Kiev, the participants in the Jewish massacres were not only the poorer classes, but also a part of the intelligentsia, as far as they belonged to the Black Hundred or sympathized with them. In the town of Stavice, in the same government, a town of more than 1,000 peasant families. There were among the participants in the pogrom many landed proprietors, students, clergy, who openly designated themselves as members of the White Guard. The terrible massacre in the Yelisavetgrad took place under the watchword, "Cut down the Jews, cut down the communists." The rabbi of Migorod testified at his examination that the soldiers seized him, pointed at him, and cried, "You are a communist, you Jewish snout!" In Bogoslav, it was the peasants who robbed and murdered the Jews on the ground, and they were all Bolsheviki and communists. The same thing happened in Taracha and in dozens and hundreds of places in which Grigoriev's bands instituted pogroms. Right, so before the Jews were the ones who were considered Bolsheviki, so then, they would accuse the Jewish peasants, like the Jews living among the peasants, of being on the side of the Bolsheviki. And that was the evil thing. But now it seems they took on the identity, the very people that they accused of being Bolsheviki, because it's a bad thing. Now suddenly the peasants decide they want to be Bolshevikis. And now they're accusing the Jews of communism. So there's a different kind of Bolshevikis, right? So, this is something that is complicated in the history, it seems, from what I was reading, right? How when there was the Russian Revolution, right, there were different factions, right? There was the Bolsheviks, who had a certain ideology, and there were a lot of people who were part of the revolution overthrowing the Tsar, and they had a different type of communism that they liked, right? They had a socialist, communist type of ideas, and then there was a civil war. So the Bolshevikis were fighting against the other people who were part of the civil war. And there was a civil war, right? And because the other people didn't agree completely with the Bolshevists, right? So it's very complicated, right? Like, this is what people don't get, right? So a lot of the people probably who were part of the Civil War that were fighting against the Bolsheviks, they didn't like pure communism, but they had communistic ideas, which were mixed with socialism, right? And so it's complicated as we continue reading, from what I understand. Right, Raspberry? Right. I need a drink. Fascinating. Fascinating. Oopa-doopa-dilly. It's okay to sound so silly. Right? I have to read more. You know, like, it's hard to read alone, because if you read alone, then it's hard to concentrate. This way it's easier to concentrate because I'm reading loud. What's the little girl? Are you bored? So because they were so complicated, because the revolution was so complicated, right? They can accuse the Jews of anything. So if they decide to take a different side of the revolution, like a different ideology, then they could just start accusing the Jews of being anything, because there was a lot of different types of ideas. You know, there was different types of, like today we have different types of people who believe in different kinds of socialism, different kinds of communism mixed, like, oh, there's capitalism with different types of ideas on what can be, and they all have different names. It's complicated. So, right? That's what people don't get. Like, and if you don't read about history and you don't know much about it, then you won't understand that, right? So that's why I was like, when I hear Candace Owens, for example, say things like, oh, the Jews were all the Bolsheviks. The Jews were killing Christians. They murdered tons of Christians. It's because the Jews were all the communists and blah, blah, blah. What she doesn't get is that there were a lot of Jews who were fighting in the Civil War, along with the other peasants within Russia. And there were Jews that were on the other side that were fighting against the Bolsheviks because they didn't want to accept the Bolshevik ideology. So, but it was all similar, right? And they paid for it with their lives, and it was civil war. Like, it wasn't, Jews just, the idea that, oh, the Jews are the ones that did the entire revolution and everything. It's like the entire country was involved in the revolution. And there was a small percentage of Jews at the time. They made up like 5% of the population, and a lot of them were in the leadership, but most of the people who were non-Jewish, right? So, for instance, you have in the Civil War, the people who were fighting against the Bolsheviks, they were once agreeing with the Bolsheviks and the communism, but they wanted a different kind of communism. And a lot of them happened to be Christian, right? And even it was a civil war, it wasn't a slaughter. Like Candace Owens likes to paint it to be. You know, like, history is complicated. It's not like, you know, whatever. So, whatever, right? So, yeah. In Cherkasy, the pogromists literally cut down all Jews, saying to them, "You want to rule over us? To use violence against us?" Especially characteristic of the movement instigated by Grigoriev is the fact that the intellectuals in their agitation in the villages used a new motive in addition to the old, namely that the Jews had done violence to the Christian religion. Right, it's like the same old thing, repeating over and over again. Oh, the Jews are the ones who, killed Christ, so therefore you have to kill them, right? A motive suggested by the phrase in the manifesto, "From the land where Christ was nailed to the cross." This grouping about Grigoriev, not only of the civic elements, but also of the Black Hundred, who dream of the return of the Tsarist order, lent to their deeds of horror in the particularly gruesome character of an attempt to annihilate and exterminate the Jewish people. So there were people who were called, I'm guessing, the Black Hundred, who were for the Tsar, right? And they wanted the Tsar to get back in power, it seems, from what I understand. And they also hated the Jews. So they also did pogroms on Jews, right? The pogromists everywhere followed a prearranged plan. The triumphal procession of the victorious Grigoriev took place under the sign of pogroms instituted by the ataman himself and his assistants, Yuvarov, Teotinik, and Nechayev. The Jewish persecutions in May must be attributed to the activity of Grigoriev. 3/4 of them took place in the southeastern project of the government of Kiev, the district between Cherkasy and Chigirin. The rest were enacted in the neighboring parts of the governments of Kherson and Poltava. In a small number of cases, the pogroms were instituted not by the bands of Grigoriev, but by locally resident elements and under the influence of above-mentioned Universal Manifesto. The Jewish massacres followed each other in the following order: Zlatopol from May 2nd to May 5th. Znamenka from May 3rd to on May 3rd, right? So it all at the same time it seemed to be happening in different villages, right? On Jews getting slaughtered at the same time in different villages. In Lebanon on May 5th, Gorodische May 11 to 12, which was a little later down the week. Orlovets from May 12th. Zolontonosha on May 12th, on the same day, right, in different city, in different village. Rotmistrova, May 13 to 14. Matusovo, May 13 to 14. Bolozaria, from May 14 to 15. Smela, from May 14 to 15. Yelisavetgrad, from 15 to 7, May 15 to 7. Novo Mirogod on May 17th, Cherkasy on May 16 to 21, Regorod on May 20, in the Sablino Znamenk sugar factory, May 20, Alexandria, May 22, Chigirin, May 25th, Alexandrovka from 15 to 18, right? Stepanovka, May 18, Semyonovka from May 18 to May 19. Gurusulov on May 20. So all this was happening in this month, right? And it was orchestrated attacks on the Jews in Ukraine. There were pogroms at the same time in Fondokivka, Medvedovka, Kamenka, Teleshchino, Station Bobrinsky, Tsvetkovo, Moshny, Globin, Kazel, Tomashov, Ivanovka, Vasiolaya, Kuta, Vesoyalaya, Podol, and others. The following Jewish persecutions during the same month are also closely connected with Grigoriev's manifesto. They all belong to the district of Uman, situated at a greater distance from the places in which Grigoriev's bands resided. Of these massacres, the most bloody were in Uman. On May 13, Dubovo 13 and 14, Talnoi, May 13, Kristinovka, Ladaizenka, and the villages Vyasovok, Mankovka, Ivanka, Buki, and others. Ivanka Trump, right? The remainder of Grigoriev's bands developed their activities also in the month of June. They destroyed in the government of Kiev Stavice on June 15, Taracha, June 16, Volodarka, June 20, Raishanovka, June 20, Skvira, June 23rd. On the 27th, they instituted a second pogrom in Alexandria, the government of Kherson. So, to understand, right, what the pogroms are, it's organized attacks on Jews, right, to rape, burn, kill, and steal, right? The followers of Grigoriev destroyed a whole line of cities, towns, root and branch, put to death or mutilated tens of thousands of Jews, and violated thousands of Jewish women and girls. But the political aim of Grigoriev to become the ruler of Ukraine was not realized. Grigoriev was able to gather the masses about him by the negative side of his program only. The hate against the Jewish Soviet power, right? But he had nothing positive to offer. That's how it usually is, the people that have the most destructive force, they have nothing positive to give, so they end up going down. He could undermine the power of the Soviet government and open the gates of Denikin, with whom, as is reliable reliably stated, he tried to get in touch, proposing to proceed in common with him against the Soviet government as well as the Directory. But he was beaten, his bands divided, one part going over to the side of the Soviet government, and the other devoting itself to the positive pillage, under the leadership of several insignificant Vatki. So, positive pillage. So, like, keep in mind that while the Jews were getting attacked and mutilated and murdered and raped, right? At the same time, the other people of the villages, right? Innocent people might have been, like we read above, right? A few pages before. There were people who were considered bourgeoisie. They were just middle-class Ukrainians, and they were getting also pillaged because they had more money. They were considered bourgeoisie, right? So when they come for the Jews, usually everybody around suffers. So whenever you see people getting anti-Semitic and wanting to attack Jews, you just know that your own life is at risk at the same time. Because if the Jews go down, you will follow soon, right? Soon after. Because that's how it always is. Grigoriev himself fell by the hand of another Batko, superior to him. It's very fitting, you know? By the name of Makhno. Extremely interesting is the resolution passed by the followers of the ideal Batko in reference to the murder of Grigoriev. Copy of a copy of the resolution from the Protocol number 4 of the General Assembly of the Council of the Revolutionary Freebooters of the governments of Kherson, Taurida, and Yekaterinoslav, in the report of the military corps on the 28th of July, 1919. The assassination of the Ataman Grigoriev on the 27th of July in the village of Septovo, circuit of Alexandria, government of Kherson, by the ideal leader of the insurrectionists, the Batko Makhno, must be regarded. So Makhno is the guy that took down, what's his name? Grigoriev. He took him down, right? So the Batko Makhno must be regarded as a necessary and required historical fact. For Grigoriev's policy, acts and aims were counter-revolutionary and had the main purpose of supporting Denikin and other counter-revolutionists, as is proved by the Jewish pogroms and the arming of the thugs. The union of his army with that of Batko Makhno is explained as being necessary in order to take away from him all the honest freebooters who are fighting for revolutionary ideas and follow him only because of their ignorance. So they continue on to say, we cherish the hope that now no one will be found who will sanction Jewish pogroms. So now he's against the pogroms when they're all the same, right? And that the working people will, in their honesty, rise against the counter-revolutionists like Denikin and others, as well as against the Bolsheviki and communists who are establishing a dictatorship by force with the help of mercenary Magyars, Chinese, and Lets. The followers of Makhno regard it as their revolutionary duty to take upon themselves the historical consequences of this assassination. Down with Jewish pogroms. When it serves them right, when they think that they can suck up to and get power to different types of powers, different types of governments, and if the governments disapprove of the, pogroms because it's, never mind, okay, killing Jews. They don't care about, they don't like the lawlessness of it. Suddenly they try to clean up their image, right, to get in with the elites. Long live the revolutionary uprising of the Ukraine. Long live the Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic. Long live socialism. Right, so as I said before, there was different factions within the revolution, right, the Russian Revolution, to overthrow the Tsar, right, the Tsaristan and the Tsar, take down the whole monarchy, right, and some of them were socialists with a mix of communism. They all had a different thing going, but the communists, right, the Bolsheviks were pure communists. And so it looks like this guy's trying to suck up to a new socialist movement, which was run by Jews, right? So he's saying, down with the Jewish pogroms, it's not good. He's trying to clean up his image to get into power. But they're all the same. They all supported the same thing. He probably took part in the pillaging of the Jews, right? The original is signed by the President Vitko Makhno, Secretary Shevchenko, attesting by acting chief of staff Mikhailov, attested by signature eligible. Reading this resolution, one might think that the Batko Makhno himself, who had assassinated Grigoriev because he had instituted Jewish pogroms, had not a drop of Jewish blood clinging to his fingers. Like I said, he probably took this guy Makhno, probably raped women and stuff, like Jewish women, and killed Jews. But he's trying to clean up his image because he wants to rub elbows with elites and get power. So because he killed his rival, Grigoriev, because, he was doing pogroms, because he had instituted Jewish pogroms, had not a drop of Jewish blood clinging to his fingers. Far from it. The bands of Makhno were guilty of the maddest excesses. They devastated Jewish cities and towns. Makhno has thousands of murdered and tortured Jews on his conscience, and the complete destruction of almost all the Jewish colonies in the south of the Ukraine in his work. It's his work. The ideal Batko himself was for now he was against the pogroms, depending upon the political situation of the moment. Exactly. So they'll do whatever it takes. It doesn't matter. They have no honor. They have no... It's tyrants. What do you want? Makhno is an intellectual, a former village schoolmaster, once in prison for a political offense, a clever and energetic man. During the first phase of the Russian Revolution, he was a member of the Yezlisavetrad executive committee of the labor deputies. At the time of the German occupation, he became a popular personality in the government of Yekaterinoslav, where he prepared the uprising against the German rule. Makhno was rewarded by the village population as one of the holy fighters for the cause of the village, who put an end to a regime which attempted to carry everything away from the Ukraine and to establish a territorialistic rule upon the flat country. Like the bands of Grigoriev, the insurrectionist bands of Makhno also occupied a whole line of points in the south. On the 18th of March, they occupied Bordyansk. On the 31st, Melitopol, Okhakov, Sivash, which went over to the side of the Soviet government. Makhno had not definitely inscribed himself with the Soviet power. Therefore, they were not so painfully affected. By his treason as by that of Grigoriev. With Soviet power. Therefore, they were not so painfully affected. So Makhno, covered with glory, as he was, constantly tried to utilize his popularity among the peasants of the Yekaterinoslav and neighboring governments for an independent policy. He called himself an anarchist, but denied all connection with the party. He wanted to be more anarchistic than the anarchists. In general, his politics in relation to his own followers as well as the peasants in the neighborhood was characterized by the attempt to distribute among them, especially among the poorest, the property, mainly Jewish, which had been plundered and collected in the small towns. Thus, he took possession of salt in the south, a very rare and therefore very expensive product, and had it distributed free to the peasants. As regards the Soviet power, he was the typical representative of the temper prevailing among the middle peasants. He never stood on the side of the Soviet government. During the first period, after the fall of the German rule, he supported the Soviet power because he regarded it as stronger and more consistent than the Directory. But he opposed it as being a city power. So he was on the side of the communists, but he didn't want them to be leading the city. And so he was against the Germans. At the same time, he was an opponent of the volunteer army of Denikin, an oppressor of the peasants and fighter for the reestablishment of the pre-revolutionary order. He defended the Soviet power and at the same time opposed the Bolsheviki and the communists, who established a dictatorship by force with the help of hired Magyars, Chinese, and Lets. When danger threatened from the right, he was ready to fight against Denikin. He fought against Grigoriev and assassinated him. He justified this act by Grigoriev's anti-revolutionary attitude, which expressed itself in Jewish pogroms and was even ready to negotiate with the Kiev government. But when Makhno fought against the Soviet government, he summoned his people to murder and exterminate the Jews. Using the watchwords, which are already familiar to us as a personality, Makhno is not a typical Batko. He is too individualistic in his makeup. As a politician, however, he is the most typical of them all, for he embodies completely at every moment the interests and desires of the middle peasants of the Ukrainian village. Interesting but not typical is the third prominent personality on the dark horizon of the Batko institution, Mazurenko, who calls himself in his pronunciamentos and proclamations the chief of the insurrectionists, the oldest among the numerous and small village and circuit Batki. Mazurenko comes from a well-known Ukrainian family, whose members had been active in public life and political life. He is an intellectual in the European sense of the word. At the beginning, he held responsible positions in the service of the Soviet government. He was the head of the arts department of the whole Ukraine and member of the Ukrainian Council of Labor Deputies. He belonged to the left wing of the Ukrainian Social Democracy, the independent social democracy who are trying to democratize the Soviet system in the Ukraine by giving the controlling influence in the Soviet organs to the representatives of the peasants. One can scarcely imagine that the humane Mazurenko later became the author of a whole series of terrible Jew-baiting pamphlets in which he incited the people to pogroms. We designated above in detail the names and spheres of activity of the most important among the lower Batki. They overran the whole Ukraine and caused terrible devastation in their districts. The Jewish population depends entirely upon the temper of the Batki and their bands. There is no escape. The whole Ukraine is divided into a number of such districts, in which cities and railway junctions are, like desert islands, to be met with only rarely, and which the Soviet power is able to hold for a while. But the moment a city gets into the hands of such a band, the Jewish population is plundered and murdered. So now you understand why, most of the Jews wanted, the Jews of Russia, not Ukraine, they were victims of pogroms every day by the Russian peasants, by the Russian people, and they were discriminated against because, Russia was a Christian country, and we all know how the Christians treated the Jews. So a lot of the Jews, they wanted this, they liked the idea of communism, because communism talks about all people being equal, right? Which means that just because someone's Jewish, you can't kill them for being Jewish, because everyone's equal, right? That is like communism. Nobody gets paid more, everybody gets paid the same, right? Everybody gets the same money, everybody gets the same clothes. Very depressing, but a lot of Jews fell for it and they were part of the revolution because they wanted to stop being killed every day. Right? So it makes sense if you're in their shoes. What would you do? So they plundered and murdered until the Soviet government succeeds in getting possession of the place again. Oh. From the end of the march, the bands began a systematic activity. In the precinct of Radomolsil and Sokolovsky bands did their work. In April, it was mainly Struck who developed a feverish activity covering the precinct of Chernobyl. In the days from the 7th to the 12th of April, the bands raged in Chernobyl itself. At the beginning of the following month, May 3rd, Gornostai was destroyed, and in the next day, May 4th, Ivankov met a similar fate. In the time intervening, they did murder and death in a whole line of neighboring villages and settlements, especially on the banks of Dnieper, where they stopped ships and drowned the Jewish passengers. So it was basically a Holocaust, a plunder, and a massacre and a genocide on Jews. By the end of August, there were 32 such places. During the whole month of April, Sokolovsky raged in his district. Zelany's bands, too, made their appearance hard by Kiev. In the days from the 7th to the 15th of April, they devastated Vasilkov, the village Alshanka, and others. In the circuit, Taracha freebooters also appeared on the scene, who did their criminal work in Bogoslav between the 4th and the 25th of April. In the following months, the bands continued their horrible activity. Radomysil had to suffer again. On the 13th of July, on the 15th of June, the bands were in Brusilov, on the 20th in Khodorkov, on the 24th in Chernyakov, then in Kornip. On the 17th of June, a pogrom was again made in Dubovo. Obykov was plundered at the same time. And on the 25th of June, Kagarlik. The pogrom activity of the bands assumed a especially dangerous scope. In the month of July, in the governments of Podolia, Kiev, and Volhynia, Kiev suffering most, as in the preceding month. It has been exactly established that the number of pogroms in the government of Kiev during the month in question was 26. In Volhynia, 8. In Podolia, 13. In the government of Kiev, the accursed work was done by the bands. In the two other governments of the regular troops of Petlura also participated. So most of it was done by peasants, and a lot of it was done by governments. The government of Kiev. Of new districts which had hitherto been spared, the first to be affected was the circuit Pogrebice, in which pogroms were instituted in Borchagovka on the 3rd of July, in Zunkov on the 5th, in Novofastov on the 11th, in Volodarka and a number of the neighboring villages on the 2nd, 9th, and 11th. To the west of these places, near the boundary of Volhynia, the pogromists were in Preluki on the 4th of July, in Vokhnovka on the 8th, in Turbov on the 9th, and Kalinovka on the 14th. In the district of Sokolov Roshevo, a Jewish massacre took place on the 3rd of July. In Mokharov on the 6th. In Brosilov on the 5th. In Kornip on the 9th. In Yosnogorodka on the 15th. In the sphere of activity of the Batko Zeleny, pogroms took place in Rizhijev on the 1st and 13th of July, in Kozin on the 17th, in Pereyaslev, government of Poltava, on the 15th to the 19th of July. In the circuit Taracha, the pogrom heroes distinguished themselves on the 2nd of July in Boryarki, on the 11th to 24th in Koshevatoi. Finally, at the end of the month, on the 29th of July, a new bloodbath took place in Uman. Wow, so it's like the Jews couldn't catch a break. Entire villages were murdered, massacred, rapes, killed. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of Jews that were Russian became Zionists, right? That's why we have like the Zionist who was, what was his name? His name was, who was the guy? Theodore Herzl, right? When he saw the affair in France where a French Jew who was emancipated, right? The Jews were emancipated in France. They got equal rights, but then a Jewish soldier who's in high command, he got accused of doing something really bad, and they blamed him just because he was Jewish, and there was zero evidence. And when Theodore Herzl saw that, how he got humiliated and lynched through the streets, the idea of Zionism, modern Zionism, sprung in his brain, right? And this is one of the reasons why Jews having a state of their own to live and to fight off our enemies is so important because of this, right? And the non-Jews, they can't stand it because they have this destructive force within them that wants this bloodthirstiness, that wants to kill us. And when they see us fighting back, it's offensive to their psyche because they're supposed to be able to just have their way with us, right? Because they're a bunch of bullies. But, in the government of Volhynia, Linnea, the pogrom in July, are distributed as follows. Kodri, 6 and 15. Chamovka, 9 and 11. Chameni Brod, is saying all the dates that it was done. Kotelnia and Sarubinsky, 10. Domobrovsky, 10. Slovechno, 10. Ksavrov, 10. In the government of Podolia, pogroms took place in the following localities. Zemerinka, July 3rd. Brailov, Pikov, Shenderov, Voronitsky, Obedin, July 10. Yanov, July 10 to 15. Tolchin, July 14. Litin, July 18. Novokonstantinov, Teplik, Geisen, Pechero, from the 20th of July to 25th. Many of the places mentioned were visited by the pogromists more than once. Radomizil, Chernyakov, Kornev, Volodarko, Yelizavetgrad, and others. In some places, there were as many as 4, 5, and even 10 pogroms until the Jewish population disappeared. It's a genocide, basically, entirely, and no trace of Jewish possessions was left. In August, the number and extent of pogroms was comparatively small. Pereyaslev, in the government of Poltava, was again visited by the bands of Lopatkin. On the 3rd of August, Jewish persecutions took place in Vinnytsia. On the 4th, in Golovanetsk. On the 25th, in Belaya Serkov. The watchwords of the bands of the Batki are the same as those of Petluro's men, with variations now and then. In Mutosovo, the Jews were attacked by bandits under the motto, "Will you, Jewish rabble, still keep ruling over us?" In Slovechno, the massacre was accompanied by the words, "Here is your commune for you, here is your Jewish empire." In Chernobyl, Strzok's bands rushed into the Jewish houses, shouting and shrieking, "Open, you communist Jews, or we will beat you to death. We will slit your bellies and drown you." Strzok's chieftains explained to their bandits the purpose of their coming as being to plunder and drown the low communists who robbed the workmen and peasants. Low communists means the Jews. In his proclamations, Strzok always spoke of the communists and the capitalists defenders of the Jews. Now and then the motto was enlarged by adding the motif of the independence of the Ukraine. In a popular assembly in Chernobyl, Strzok called out to the crowd, "Kill the Jews and save the Ukraine!" In Radomyśl, Skolovsky's band forced the Jews, before they were shot, to sing, "The Ukraine is not yet lost." So can you imagine, like, they round the Jews up, right, force them to sing their songs, and then kill them. It's a humiliation on top of genocide, right? So this is for Candaceans to understand that, like, the Ukrainians, right, that were fighting off the so-called Soviet Jews were running around pillaging any Jewish community in Ukraine to basically wipe them out and murder them, right? Oh, but she'll never talk about that, right? It reminds me, it's like really, really scary, like the idea that Jews were so vulnerable and their entire families were wiped out, right? In Ukraine, in Europe, at any time, at any given moment. Like, my sister sent me on Instagram, she sent me a video of the train in New York. There's a Jewish mother and her daughter walking in the train station, and a black guy was screaming and yelling at them. I think I have to show you because it's traumatic. It's very traumatic. And people on Instagram are defending this black guy who was basically threatening and terrorizing a mother and a daughter for just being Jewish, right? And screaming at them about Gaza. And it's bizarre, and it's sick, and it's evil, and it's something that the world has to see. So let's re-traumatize ourselves. What, Amber? Where's the baby? Here. I don't know if you can see, but we'll try.
I am a proud Jewish woman, and I will always stand with Israel, and I will always say, Am Yisrael High. However, I need to share a very disturbing video that I just experienced on the subway, and I took this video. And I just want to say that I feel so bad for this woman's child who had to listen to her mother screaming such vulgar things when the Jewish people around her were just simply walking and existing as Jews.
Okay, so it wasn't a black man, it was a black woman who was walking with her child in the train station, and she sees Jewish people around her, and she's spewing hate. And this is what Jewish people have to go through. And then it makes you understand why Israel is so necessary for the Jewish people. Because without Israel, right, the entire Jewish nation, what's left of us, is basically, we're at the mercy of these barbarians, of these lowlives, of these peasants who, they are just out there for blood, right? And it's really frightening.
On the subway, and I took this video.
Listen to the lady.
And I just want to say that I feel so bad for this woman's child who had to listen to her mother screaming such vulgar things when the Jewish people around her were just simply walking and
minding their own
existing
business
as Jews.
I thought it was a man because she has such a horrible voice.
Whatever your stance on the Middle East is, if you think that screaming at random Jews in Brooklyn, New York is going to do anything, you are the problem.
Right. And
I am a
those kind of people are the most dangerous, right? Like, that's one of the reasons I have a problem with the black community in general, right? It's because time and time again, the black community, they act like a bunch of thugs, and they attack women. Will go, even when they have their children, they will go and attack Jewish families. Like, there's no low that they won't go to, right? They will rob Jews, they will attack Jews, they will, every single day it's another occurrence. And in the name of either, oh, the Jews are robbing us, or, oh, the Jews are pushing us out, or, oh, now it's the excuses, oh, the Jews are robbing Palestinians, like as if any Jewish person across the world has anything to do with what's going on here. But listen, we are all connected, but to attack random families, random Jewish people on the street that are just minding their own business, like, what's your problem? You know, like, literally, like, you got issues, like, serious problems, and it's not okay. It's not okay. It's just not okay. It's disgusting. It's, you know, and this is something that Jews experience every single day on a daily basis wherever they are in the world. And that's why we need Israel, right? It just proves the point that we're not safe anywhere. Even in Israel, we're not safe, but at least here we have a possibility to defend ourselves and to stick up for ourselves, and to not allow just random barbarians and lowlives and losers and lunatics and any crazy person that's just let out of a mental institution or some insane asylum to decide that it's a bad day and just go rampaging and murdering and raping and killing Jews wherever they are, because, you know, we're a good scapegoat, just like we're reading here, right? So back to the story. As stated before, the activity of the bands and of their Badki had terrible consequences for the Jewish population of the Ukraine. The question arises, what were the relations between the Batko institution and the directory? As said before, a whole line of Batki were followers of Petlura. In the school of Petlura and of the directory, they learned the custom and the practice, the inclination and the political wisdom of carrying on the fight against Bolshevism by means of Jewish persecutions. The institution of the Batko supplements the pogrom activity of the directory. As long as the Batki carried on, it was not necessary, except occasionally, to have a recourse to military pogroms. So for the government of the Ukraine to go and attack the Jews. The latter demoralized the army, undermined discipline, and changed the troops into bands of robbers and murderers, which naturally is highly undesirable for the state force. The institution of the Batko is a local phenomenon, which affects mainly the local peasant population, and appears irresponsible in respect to public opinion in Western Europe. The Batki need not put any restraint upon their activities in persecuting the Jews. In the interest of high politics, before the Entente, the Batki could be designated as local robbers. At the same time, they carried out in splendid fashion the dirty work of intimidating the Jewish population disorganizing the elites of, not the elites, the cities, disorganizing the cities and towns, and in this way fighting the Soviet power. The Directory enjoyed the fruit of Batko institution. The former tried, therefore, to organize the uprisings, to centralize the effort of the insurrectionists, and to guide their activity in a definite direction, right? So because they can't control the troops otherwise, because they're going to just be robbers and barbarians and they will attack the regular people. So take all that fury that would be put on against the regular people and out of control, directed towards the Jews. In the army reports are found not only communications concerning the movements on Petlura's front, but also data concerning the aims on the front of the insurrectionists. In August 1919, Petlura and Denenkin approached Kiev simultaneously, under cover of the bands of Zeleny and other Batki who had forced their way into the city. The Batko of all Batki, Mazorenko, stood very near to the Directory, and it is very probable that he was the connecting link between it and the insurrectionists. There is evidence that the Directory sent special emissaries to the points of insurrection for the purpose of maintaining proper connection between itself and the Batki. But even apart from this, the Directory showed the bloody example, and by the political utilization of the terrible weapon, created the conviction throughout the Ukraine that Jewish pogroms were not punished, that the possessions of the Jews might be plundered, that Jewish women might be violated, and there was no prohibition against the annihilation of the Jews. This conviction created the atmosphere in which the elemental force of the masses, aroused and excited in the process of the revolutionary ferment, could be guided in the direction of annihilating this defenseless nation for the sole purpose of thereby injuring the political enemies of the Directory. The Directory fanned the national hate, drew forth from the depths of the Ukrainian national soul the slumbering distrust and antipathy, planted in the course of historical development against the Jews as strangers, the Jews as commercial middlemen, the Jews as the former farmers of the Lord's estates, who were hanged by the ancestors of the peasant of today, together with the priest and the Polish Pan, proprietor of great land estates. The Directory knew how to awaken this hate and to give it a definite form and direction, and a definite political content. No wonder, therefore, that this Machiavellian method bore such fruit. The agitation of the Directory was not merely an incitement of the masses in an indefinite way. It was an actual content, an unequivocal instigation to murder the Jews. The lamentations and Pharisaic attempts at justification to the effect that the Directory could not control the bands of the crowds, that the latter had gone further than the Directory had intended, cannot exculpate it in any way, not even legally, not to say morally and politically. It is not merely that it could have foreseen the consequences of its doings. It did foresee them, it desired them, counted on them, and took advantage of them. What is known in criminal law as excess of the executor does not apply here. Here the executors played the motif whispered to them with the precision of a virtuoso, and did it to the greatest satisfaction and joy of the instigators. In August, the pogrom crowds became smaller. The political situation changed. The Bolsheviki were driven from the Ukraine. The Petlura and his people attained what they wanted. The enemy was beaten. The beneficiary of the success, however, was another. Denikin occupied Kharkov, Yekaterinoslav, Poltava, and was approaching Ukraine. The changed situation demanded other methods of fighting. The method of Jewish massacres was no longer needed, and so was given up. As already mentioned, the Directory even passed a resolution to fight against pogroms. To be sure, there was another element here that must be mentioned. According to communications sent to us from many sides and according to the existing reports of the Ukrainian papers, the standpoint of international politics was also taken into consideration in the pogrom agitation. Not only the heads of the political bodies, but the village intellectuals, and to a certain extent, even the masses were aware of the significance of the international position of the Ukraine. The Ukrainian flat country had had a thorough object lesson in this matter, such as the German occupation with its stringent regime, the occupation of Odessa and the southern coast by the Allies, the negotiations of the Directory with the Allies through General Grekov, and so on, suffering from want of the most absolute necessities, manufactured ware, shoes, salt machines, etc. The Ukrainian village was eager for commercial relations with Western Europe. The village intellectuals, represented by the priests and teachers, we have seen that they took an active part in the excesses of the bands killing Jews, carried on their agitation by saying that the Entente desired the destruction of the Bolsheviki, as Jews and communists were the same. Jewish pogroms would represent the gift which the Ukrainian people must present to the Entente, and the latter would not be long in signifying the recognition of the Ukrainian people. In return, now in August, the Jewish pogroms, as a method of fighting, proved themselves not only useless, but, as was said before, harmful for the reason that the vague rumors of the massacres which had penetrated to the West had produced great public indignation. The withdrawal, which was now whispered to the regular troops by the Directory, I think the Directory is like the government of Ukraine, right, was understood by their devoted Batki. The pogroms diminished in violence. They were no longer all destructive, but like the distant thunder of a past storm, they assumed the innocent form, according to Ukrainian concepts, of pillage of Jewish possessions and occasional acts of violence and murder. We learned later, from a reliable source, that Batko Makhno had issued a proclamation to his insurrectionists, in which he ordered them to discontinue Jewish pogroms, for according to a communication of Batko Petlora, the Entente is very much dissatisfied on that account, a step which seems very likely on the part of the wise and far-sighted Makhno. Now we're up to chapter IV. Let's just say, I think it's 5. Page 85. I don't know how to read numbers, right? So we're up to page 85, and the next chapter is about the Soviet power. So that will be interesting, how the Soviet power takes over Ukraine. That's something I'm actually curious about, because, right, my father's from Ukraine, and so a good thing about when the Soviets took over, right, the Bolshevik Revolution and everything, before even Stalin lived there, or maybe when Stalin took it was worse, I'm not sure, but what was good about the Soviet takeover of Russia and Ukraine is that the pogroms stopped, right? The Jews being massacred, killed, and pillaged, it stopped. But it was a war against religion, right? So there were a lot of Jews who were religious, so then the communists rounded up the religious people, put them in camps, and forced them to hard labor, and a lot of them were tortured to death, right? So that's what came with communism. So anyone religious got tortured to death, but that was more, I'm not sure if it was when they first took power, when it was under Lenin, or if that was like the Great Purges was under Stalin, right? And they went crazy on everybody. So, and a lot of the Jews who actually were part of the revolution to begin with, and they didn't exactly agree to the Bolshevik way, right, to the communist way, they had slightly differing ideas. Their ideas were crushed by murdering them, killing them, right? So, but the good thing about living under the Soviets was that the Jews weren't fair game to just kill, right? That was forbidden, but they were discriminated in other ways. Like, if you're Jewish, you can't go to college, right? If you want a job, who gets a job? Not you. Somebody else will get, who's not Jewish will get a job before you, right? And a lot of the Jews, they forgot where they came from. They didn't even know what it means to be a Jew anymore, because communism stomped out all religion. So a lot of Jews were secular, right? And okay, the new God was the state, but right? And so a lot of them didn't understand why they were being persecuted. They knew that they're ethnically Jewish, but they didn't understand why they're being picked on, right? In school, at work, growing up, everything. It was just, it was a struggle, right? And so then when my father came out of Russia, for example, He came as a refugee. I think it was under Khrushchev. And he came to America, right? And he loves America because it's a different country, right? It's a different system. It's a different capitalist. It's freedom of religion. You're supposed to not get picked on for who you are, for what you worship, right? It's supposed to be free. Civil rights, right? But it seems like America's taken a nosedive in that aspect because in the last year we've seen a lot of Jews being attacked by Americans who hate Jews. You know, like the anti-Semitism has raised its ugly head again this past year since October 7th, right? It's very scary. The whole thing is very scary. It's very disturbing, and it's like there are so many people that literally think it's okay, and they believe a certain narrative. They believe a lie, right? They have this whole story made up in their head, and they're not willing to see the other side. Like, okay, we Jewish people, we see the other side. We know what they say, you know. We know their story, the made-up story of, occupation and torture and all that, right? Which they try to, you know, accuse the Jews of doing. But we know it's not true, and that's their side. We know their side, right? But those same Jew-hating Nazis who have that narrative in their mind, they refuse to see another side. And a lot of people refuse to see another side which might not agree with their way of thinking, right? They're really cowardly because they're unable to actually, you know, take a look into another orchard, take a look into another aspect, to another opinion, to another idea, right? They're too afraid because if they look and start thinking, maybe they'll see things differently, right? So a lot of the times, you know, like it's not necessarily pleasant to go and look at somebody else's viewpoint, especially when it comes to, you know, you're Jewish, you know what they think of you, but you know, like the whole narrative of, oh yeah, the USS Liberty, for example, oh, it's the Jews have, the Israelis, they attacked the USS Liberty and they wanted to wage a war with America, they killed them on purpose and all that, right? Like, and so sometimes it's hard to go and, like, there's videos that are made about it, right? And then there are different kinds of people that come together on podcasts to try to figure it out and talk about it. And it's very anti-Semitic, but when you look at what they actually say, right? So I decided to go and actually go look at what they say. There was zero evidence to suggest that anything they said had any grounds for any sort of truth. There was no truth to anything that they said, which is embarrassing on their part, because if you're coming together for a hate fest, at least have something to stand on. You know, like, you can't, you know, like, they're trying to string things together that have no connection whatsoever with zero evidence, and it's embarrassing for them when I looked at it, and they try to paint the whole picture, right? But it's really just a hate fest. It's a hate fest against a certain people, because a lot of the non-Jews, they take it as an insult that the Jews are independent of them, right? Like the Jews that were once being slaughtered at the mercy of their neighbors, right? And the Jews that were stepped on and spat at and not allowed to have jobs and everything and were meant to be abused, suddenly the Jew rises up and is independent and gives you the middle finger. It's a very insulting to the haters, you know, like, how dare you have any independence or freedom or strength to resist being abused? How dare you, right? So the Jew haters, they don't like it. It's very uncomfortable for them, right? Like, when I was looking at YouTube, for example, so if you watch my videos in sequence, you'll know where it is, whatever, but this girl, right, this ex-Muslim girl, she's on a panel of Muslims, right, and they say exactly what they think of Jews. Oh, the Muslims say, we kept the Jews in line, now they are out of control. So the Muslims, they enjoyed when the Jews were living under them, and the fact that they can control the Jews and they can abuse the Jews and they can make them into second-class citizens and they can control and kidnap Jewish children and make them Muslim and forcibly convert them and do all the abuses and make them give a tax, right? For protection, right? To be a protected second class citizen. So they can't stand it that the Jew is not there anymore. The Jews out of their countries. The Jews had fled because they didn't want to be killed by them in 1947, 1948, 1949. And all the Jews in the Middle East, they left the Middle Eastern countries because they were being murdered, right? And so nobody talks about that. Like, a million Jews had to flee from Arab countries because the Arabs went nuts on them. There was the what they call the, what was it called, the, how could I forget? It was a pogrom, right, that they did on the Jews, and terrible things happened, and they wanted to make concentration camps because their great leader, Hajman al-Husseini, who colluded with Hitler, was telling all the Arabs in the Middle Eastern countries to kill the Jews because that was the right thing to do in his mind, right? So the Jews fled and came to Israel and created a haven for Jewish people here. European Jews came here. Jews that fled from the Middle East, they created what we have today. And they can't stand it. Their blood is boiling because how dare the Jews fight back? And I always think to myself how funny it is that the Arabs, 50 countries of Arabs, they cannot defeat one country of 7 million Jews. They cannot. However hard they try, they cannot defeat the Jews. They can't. They just can't do it. And why is that? Because they're stupid. It's very simple. They're stupid. So, yeah. So, we're up to the Soviet power, right? We're up to here, page 83, I think it is, 85. And we'll come back to read it another time, right? We'll get through this. It's 400 pages or more. But I want to read how the Soviets came to power and all that because it's very interesting. And it's documented evidence. This book it's a book of documented evidence, which is taken from newspapers. It's taken from the government documents of Ukraine at the time, of what happened to the Jews and how they have all the paperwork on the plans to kill the Jews in Ukraine. So they have that in this book. They have all the evidence that you need to know the truth of what happened in 1919 to the Jews of Ukraine and how they were slaughtered and genocided on and all that, right? And you also have the sayings, the witnesses that speak and say what this leader of the Ukrainian peasants said to their people, what to do and how to murder the Jews and all that, right? So it's great. That's why it's so important to read. But the problem that I have reading alone is that I lose focus very quickly. So when I read online, I learn something and I also share it, right, for anybody that is interested. Most people are not interested, but it's just something that I think it's important to learn, like whatever. So we have this, and yeah, we'll leave it there. Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year to all those people who celebrate New Year's, right? It's 2025. Crazy, I know, right? Like, the year it has been a nutty year. It's been a traumatizing, very traumatic year for Jewish people worldwide, regardless of, if they're religious, not religious, if they're from ultra-Orthodox, Jews worldwide. It's been traumatizing because the abuse that spread after October 7th by the local non-Jewish population in every single country, in Europe, in America, everywhere Jewish people live, the abuse that they had to come under. Thank God there wasn't any major murders, thank God, because there seems to be some sort of law and order in democratic countries so far, right? But the amount of abuse that the Jewish communities came under, and even the non-religious people who, a lot of them married non-Jews, and they're also feeling it. They're also feeling the hate from the local population who stand with Palestine, right, against the Jews and against Israel. And a lot of Jewish people that are not even affiliated, so-called affiliated with any synagogue, they've turned to Judaism, right? They've tried to learn more about where they came from because of what happened on October 7th. And it's just been a very traumatic year for everyone. And it's still traumatic. We're still fighting wars. You know, our soldiers are still in Lebanon, in Gaza. Soldiers are still dying. Here in Judea and Samaria, we have sleeper cells, Arabs who are, you know, I don't understand how the Israeli government allows the Muslims in Judea and Samaria here to the so-called West Bank, right? I don't know why they allow them to have any sort of power, to have any weapons. Where did, like, the Muslims here, they are like building up military to, you know, massacre Jewish people like me who live in this area, right? Because I'm a settler, right? According to them, they want to like massacre Jews. They don't want any Jews living in their land, right? That is not racist at all, right? Like, as if there's 2 million Arabs living in Israel proper, but Jews are not allowed to live within Palestine, right? Like, that's how racist they are. Like, if you think about it, if you think about how is that not racist to not want Jewish people to live and to grow in your so-called country, you know? Like, oh, we don't want them to, rebuilding settlements is stopping the peace process. Really? Jews are not allowed to live in Palestinian land, in Arab land? That's not racist at all. Why don't you want Jewish presence in your land? What? You want apartheid of Jews? Right? Like, that's, like, people, that's how they really think, you know? Like CNN, they think it's the U.S. government. Oh, building in settlements in Arab land, Palestine, is stopping the peace process. Really? That's stopping the peace process? You're okay with the fact that the Arabs are racist and they don't want Jews to live in their land? How racist can you get? Right? Like, oh, Jews have to have Arabs, Muslims, who want to kill us, live in our land peacefully. My doctor the other day, I went to the doctor yesterday, and whatever, for something. And the doctor that let me see him, right, because I didn't make an appointment, I just showed up, he was an Arab. Basically, I switched, I had another Arab doctor, and after October 7, he told me that soon the Arabs will be the majority in Israel, right, the Muslims. So I was shocked that he said that to me, and anyone who I tell that to, they're shocked. Because that's a very Muslim thing to say. It's a very hateful thing to say to a Jewish person. And so, but now I didn't make an appointment, so I went to another Arab doctor, right? The guy's an Arab. He looked like he belongs in the Taliban. You know what I'm saying? How can you even trust him? He's an Arab guy, Muslim. They all believe in ISIS. You know, they don't believe that Jews should live in Israel. Even the Israeli Arabs. Right? But, oh, we're the apartheid ones. We're the ones who are not allowing them to live in our country and build and have houses and homes and families and to be doctors and lawyers and everything. Like, my doctor's an Arab. But, oh, the Jews are not allowed to live in an Arab country. The Jews are not allowed to live in Palestine. The Jews are not allowed to live in Judea and Samaria and have jobs with the Arabs and work alongside them and be equal to them. Because why? What other reason other than they're a bunch of fucking racists? Do you know what I'm saying? Double standard, right? Like, the Jews have to tolerate cutthroats that want to murder their families. But the Arabs, our presence in Judea and Samaria is stopping the peace process because they're a bunch of fucking racists. Literally. Yeah, so I went to the Talibani doctor. He looked like a Arab. Like a Taliban. He looked like big beard. He looked just like an Talibani. But he's my doctor. Not my doctor, but one of the doctors in the Miyuchedet, right? And I was like, I don't even feel comfortable to say anything, to speak about anything like you should feel, right? Because I know, like, deep down that probably a lot of these, like, Muslim doctors, they don't see women as women. They look down, especially if you're Jewish, they look down on you, right? Because that's their religion. So, but it's a fact of life, right? Like, in Israel, this is who we have. We have, the Arabs are everywhere. The Muslims, they have positions everywhere, right? In the special needs homes, they have they're working there alongside you, which is fine as long as they don't want to cut our throats. You know, if they would just get rid of their hatred for us, it'd be completely fine. But they hate us, even if they have equal rights, everything. They're in the Knesset. They hate us. They stand with Hamas. They're traitors, but they're not really traitors because they're really loyal to their Taliban. You know, so yeah, the whole thing is just very bizarre and hypocritical, and like I never understood why it's so racist to not want Jews to live in the Judea and Samaria until other people pointed out, like, you know, like, it's actually pretty racist for Muslims not to want Jews to grow and to buy houses and to build and to have children in their so-called land, right? Of course it's not their land because biblically and historically this is Jewish land, right? But for the fact that they want so-called Palestine, right? And then they wanted Gaza. But they had Gaza. We pulled out 2005, and then what do you know? Next thing you know, is not one Jew could live in Gaza because Jews under Gazan rule, under Hamas rule, you saw what happened on October 7th, right? Like, that's what they want to do to us. So Jews can't live under Arab rule because the Muslims will massacre us because that's what they want to do. They've done it. They show it. They hate us, you know? It's very sad. It's the truth. And anybody says, oh, not all Muslims hate Jews. Not all Muslims hate Jews, right? One-on-one, a lot of them can be very nice people, but just put them in a mob and see how they behave. Just put them, as soon as they expand in numbers and they are with their family and their friends and they're starting to take over, right? And they are growing. As soon as you have them in a crowd, see how they behave, right? They turn into lynch mobs. The sweet, gentle girl that you once thought is your friend, she'll turn around and stab you in the neck, right? That's their mentality. And I never understood this, you know? I heard it from people. I never understood it. I was very liberal when I was younger. I was very liberal. I was like, oh, you can be friends with them. Oh. And then you start living and you see real life and you see what's really going on, and it's just like, whoa. It's like, it's bad. It's people are cutthroats. These people and their children are cutthroats, literally. So, right? Okay, so what I want to see is, I just want to see the news real quick. And 2 Israeli nationals injured in New Orleans attack. So there's an attack in New Orleans. Show a survivor lights menorah at Berlin Icon. Okay. Festive gathering offer Israeli troops respite. Make quick sufganiyot without yeast. Okay, so that's that, my friends. Okay. Thanks for being with me. It's been real. Feel free to like or not to like. Feel free to subscribe or not subscribe. Feel free to comment. And happy Hanukkah and have a great day.